Juan Carlos Hidalgo is a policy analyst for Latin America at the Cato Institute. He compared for me the problems between the two countries that they are having.
Indeed, the economic situation in both countries is rapidly deteriorating, and they have a similar background. This is the deal. Both governments have overspent over the last decade. In the case of Argentina, public spending has actually doubled since 2002. The same is the case with Venezuela, where President Chavez, the former President Chavez, used oil revenues to dramatically increase social spending, especially, but also to spend on many other investments on agriculture, industrial policy, and so on. For a large part of last decade, both countries benefited tremendously from high commodity prices. In the case of Argentina, soy, and in the case of Venezuela, oil. It is estimated that Venezuela received like $1 trillion in oil revenues in the last 12 to 13 years. However, now that the commodity boom is receding, is subsiding, and in the case of Venezuela, for example, production is dwindling, the amount of public spending is not keeping pace with revenues from these commodities. So the governments have had to rely on other sources of revenue, especially going to the central banks, printing money, and then forcing inflation.
The irony of it all is that the two governments are two very different types of governments, if you will, yet they find themselves in a very similar situation. What are the differences between the two problems, though?
I think the difference is in grace, not in the policies themselves. I think that the Venezuelan government has been much more aggressive in destroying the private sector throughout expropriations, throughout nationalizations. And basically, the only source of dollars nowadays when it comes to Venezuela is oil. 96% of the foreign exchange coming to Venezuela is oil. Thus, the fact that the oil production has decreased by a quarter in the last decade is a significant factor behind Venezuela's crisis. Whereas in the case of Argentina, they still have a strong private sector, which is hurting right now. But in the case of Argentina, the government has been less aggressive in pursuing policies that harm the private sector, and thus is coping not that badly as in the case of Venezuela.
Let's get to solutions in solving the problem. Let's start with Venezuela. There's a shortage of dollars. They're trying to control prices, which means they're trying to control inflation. Does the administration, I guess, have the right path to fixing the problem, or does something else need to happen urgently?
Since President Chavez died, there's been a sense of paralysis in the Venezuelan government. They haven't been implementing the policies that many people expected they will do in order to face the crisis. I think that in both countries, the solution begins by cutting public spending. As long as you continue running massive amounts of public spending, you need the central bank to finance this spending, and thus you create inflation, and thus you create the pressures on your own currencies.
But the critics will say if you cut public spending, that's been a big part of the government's expenditure, which is a part of the gross domestic product, which is propping up the economy to a large extent. If you cut that part out, isn't there a worry that the economy could fall off the cliff?
No, because then the cut in public spending will also cause a decrease in inflation rates, which is one of the main problems right now. It will ease the pressure on the domestic currencies right now. Let's remember that in the case of Venezuela, the black market exchange rate is like 7 times the official exchange rate. In the case of Argentina, it's also like severely overvalued the currency. So you need to face those issues, and those issues, in both countries, the solution starts by cutting spending. Otherwise, you're going to continue having runaway inflation, and thus you're going to continue facing shortages of dollars, which is causing a lot of series of other problems.
So you've got two countries, similar problems. Which one's likely to be fixed first?
That's a very difficult question. A lot has to do with politics too. In the case of Argentina, the Argentinian president is leaving office. She won't be able to go for re-election in 2015, but you still have 1.5 years of her remaining in power. In the case of Venezuela, I mean, the economic situation could deteriorate so rapidly that could also destabilize the political system.